My name is Teele Kuusk. I'm a UROONCO RCC associate editor, and I'm very pleased today to have with me Zayd Tippu, who is oncologist from Royal Marsden and researcher from Crick Institute. And thank you so much for joining. And we are going to talk about kidney cancer biology today.
Oh no, thank you very much to you and to the entire team at UROONCO for having me. It's a real privilege.
Thanks. So what are your thoughts? Some small renal masses could behave very aggressively in times and give metastasis very early on. So what is the biological rationale and your thoughts about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for a long time, we always thought of these small renal masses defined as less than 4 centimeters as being very indolent in behavior, and thus questions about surveillance versus upfront surgery. But I think exactly as you alluded to, there's a lot of heterogeneity in terms of their clinical phenotype, in terms of their clinical behavior. And we really understand some of the molecular features which drive those differential outcomes. So really kidney cancer, and by this I'm really speaking to clear cell kidney cancer, the genomics here, so mutations within the DNA of the tumor become really important. So we know that about 70 to 90% of clear cell kidney cancers have mutations in the VHL gene where it becomes inactivated. And these, if happen in isolation, are generally quite indolent, so are enriched in these small renal masses. The challenging thing then is when they acquire additional mutations beyond VHL. And these are largely tumor suppressors on chromosome 3, so mutations in things like SETD2, PBRM1, but also specifically BAP1, this tumor suppressor gene on 3P. Alongside these individual driver gene mutations, we know that some of these small renal masses have changes in their copy number alterations, so gains or losses of part of the chromosome. And particularly things like 9P, so the short arm of chromosome 9, and the long arm of chromosome 14, we know confer that metastatic potential. So if we can build frameworks for these small renal masses where we get an insight in terms of their molecular behavior, their tumor genomics, it provides a much greater strategy or framework to really understand who needs intervention early, who is at that higher risk of metastatic potential versus those that will always have that more indolent behavior.
Interesting. And do we have now some kind of predictive tools to avoid active surveillance for this kind of tumor?
The challenge is we're so far away from clinical implementation. The challenge here is about cost and scalability. We know that next generation sequencing isn't particularly straightforward and cost effective at the moment, but that is really what we need to think to move towards, or how we can use new technologies as surrogates for that next generation sequencing. For example, pathology. Are there features that we can predict from H&E, i.e. the morphological features that predict the underlying genetic alterations? And that may be a way of scaling this into clinic, providing a framework for that decision making.
Okay. And now going on to neoadjuvant setting, which is hot topic as well. So what are your thoughts about, are there any molecular targets in neoadjuvant setting, and can we select the best candidates for best outcomes, or what are your biological?
A really lovely question. So I think the neoadjuvant immunotherapy scene is exactly as you say, a really emerging hot topic, and we've learned a lot from other tumor types, particularly in the context of melanoma, another immunotherapy responsive tumor type, where the response rates far exceed those from just adjuvant treatment alone. The challenging thing for us in kidney cancer is twofold. A, we don't necessarily have these molecular implementable biomarkers at the moment, but there are potential candidates coming through. And equally, our definition of what does pathological response look like in kidney cancer. We know that in melanoma, breast cancer, that there are consortium and consensus statements to say what pathological response looks like. We've yet to define that. And also then there are questions about what's the adequate time for run-in for neoadjuvant treatment, and what risks do we confer to patients from primary progression that renders them surgically infeasible or inoperable, which is kind of that never event that we don't want. To come back to the molecular question, again, as I say, probably not there exactly now, but lots of emerging candidates. Probably the most promising is KIM1. This is a transmembrane glycoprotein that we measure in the periphery, in the blood of patients, which we know in the context of advanced disease tracks really nicely with response to immunotherapy, and also post-definitive surgery is a great marker for minimal residual disease, where we could potentially stratify patients for adjuvant therapy, i.e. high levels of KIM1, higher risk of recurrence, and maybe candidates who are prioritized for adjuvant therapy strategies. We haven't interrogated this in the neoadjuvant space, but I think the dynamics probably will be the same as what we see in the metastatic space. But ultimately, what I think as a field and as a community we need to move towards is this move away from single biomarkers to composite measures. Can we integrate multiple features to better predict long-term response and survival? So are there features from the periphery, such as KIM1, that we could integrate with tumor features which we procure after neoadjuvant treatment? Pathological response, immune cell infiltration, the presence of things like tertiary lymphoid structures to generate these composite signatures, which could be then a really nice framework for escalating or de-escalating adjuvant treatment following your neoadjuvant run-in.
But do you believe that neoadjuvant setting in kidney cancer will be only to select patients for adjuvant treatment, or it could have also potential survival benefit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We don't know yet. The data's not there. There's a couple of academic investigator-led studies coming from the NKI amongst other places which will report on this, as well as larger phase 2 and phase 3 studies. We don't have the data yet, but I do think from a biology perspective, having the in situ tumor with a broader repertoire of neoantigens, these aberrant peptides which kind of act as that substrate for immunotherapy to act on, I think this will become a new standard of care. We've seen that in melanoma, and I think that will translate as well to kidney cancer.
Okay, promising.
Promising, for sure.
So now going on with metastatic disease, what are your thoughts about removing or treating the primary in metastatic setting? And do you believe that there is any significance of timing treatment?
The deferred cytoreductive nephrectomy question, I think, is kind of that real hot topic which people have very strong feelings about. And the lack of prospective data in the immunotherapy era means that we can't really definitively say. I think there are two main scenarios. Is there still a role for upfront cytoreductive nephrectomy in the context of limited extrarenal disease, which may then defer the need for systemic treatment? There probably is a role for that, and we can speak to the biology relative to this. What we know from some of the work that we've done within the TRACERx renal program is that the primary tumor has the entire repertoire of molecular alterations which confer metastatic competence. But we also know that primary tumors are very heterogeneous, they're very diverse genetically. So this metastatic competence may be restricted to subclones or subpopulations of that primary tumor, which may then give rise to later metastatic seeding events. So if we can remove that, what we call this evolutionary sink of diversity up front, that may confer a survival benefit down the line. The challenge is now relative to kind of those who present with more rapidly progressing disease or multifocal disease at the outset. We know that there's no role for upfront nephrectomy. Carmina's demonstrated that in the VEGF era, and we think that probably holds true in the immunotherapy era as well. What the selective pressure of immunotherapy then does for a deferred cytoreductive nephrectomy, we don't necessarily know the answers to that. And I think ultimately, until we've got prospective randomized data in an immunotherapy setting, in studies like Nordic Sun and Probe are looking at this, it's very hard for us to know if a deferred cytoreductive nephrectomy post-immunotherapy is the right thing to do or not. In terms of the timing, ultimately, we've got no idea. So what we probably think is, rather than mandating a specific time window for all patients, is to really characterize that on an individual basis. We know from retrospective efforts, those that benefit best are those that have got excellent extrarenal responses, so near complete response at metastatic sites. So the timing to that can vary hugely between patients. So I don't think we can mandate that nephrectomy has to happen within this time period or window, but really to understand the dynamics of radiological response, which is probably reflected within the primary tumor.
Okay, but do you believe that still like at least 6 months period should be waited before? I think, or 9 months, 12 months?
So I think at the very minimum, it will be 3 months, in the fact that this is what the studies are kind of interrogating, that 10 to 12 week period, and allows you hopefully 4 doses of combination treatment. I would think anything before then, far too early. I think the longer the lean into that, probably the better to really give you an understanding of radiological dynamics.
Okay. One question more.
Please.
So what do you think about discontinuation of systemic treatment in metastatic setting?
So it's really challenging because it depends on what your regulatory approvals in your local country or institution do. So we're speaking the UK at the moment. I'm a UK-based oncologist. So if we discontinue treatment, it's very hard for us to re-access that treatment. So we waste a line. So we're often very unwilling to do so. Whereas in other parts of the world, to re-challenge patients after discontinuation is much easier. So the nuance of that decision-making is less. I think if we look at an all-comers population and you look at the data from Checkmate 214, this was the registration study of ipi/nivo versus sunitinib for those with intermediate to poorest disease. We've now got 9-year follow-up data from that. And absolutely, that is demonstrating that there is a proportion of patients who get really long-term response, but equally there are still late events going on. So is that associated with treatment discontinuation? Potentially. So I would be a little bit nervous.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Zayd Tippu, for joining today, and good luck with all your research and continuation of the work.
Oh, cheers. Thank you very much, the team, for inviting me, and I look forward to hopefully reporting back in the months and years to come. Thank you.